60 seconds. That's the warning time Israeli civilians are getting now before impact, not 15 minutes like the system was designed for, 60 seconds. And what happened in the last 24 hours didn't just escalate this war, it may have killed the last exit anyone had left. I'm Kane Shimatsuka, and I've spent the last decade analyzing conflicts that governments prefer, you don't fully understand. Today I'm going to walk you through something that should be making every strategist in Washington lose sleep, but somehow isn't making headlines the way it should. Because while everyone's focused on the missile count, they're missing the structural collapse happening underneath. Stay with me, because the next 72 hours will determine whether this stays contained or whether we're watching the beginning of something nobody can control. Here's what actually happened, and I need you to understand this in sequence because the order matters. Iran didn't just launch missiles at Israel. That's the surface. What they did was execute a systematic dismantling of the detection architecture that Israel's entire defense doctrine depends on. First, the radar installations, the long-range early warning systems that give defenders time to calculate intercept solutions, then the tracking infrastructure, the eyes that tell Patriot batteries and arrow systems where to aim, and only after blinding the system did they hit the targets everyone's talking about. That's not random, that's doctrine. That's a kill chain designed by people who spent years studying exactly how Israeli air defense is layered, and exactly how to collapse those layers in the correct order. The warning time dropping from 15 minutes to 60 seconds isn't a technical glitch. It's the visible symptom of a system that's been surgically degraded at the sensor level. And the people who designed this strike package knew precisely what they were doing. But here's the part that should concern you more than the missile impacts. Iran hit energy infrastructure. Not military bases, not government buildings, energy production. And that choice, that specific targeting decision, tells you something critical about what Tehran believes this conflict is actually about. When you aim at a refinery, you're not trying to win a battle. You're trying to break an economy. You're saying every time you hit us, we'll make your citizens pay at the pump, at the grocery store, in heating bills they can't afford. That's not warfare, that's economic strangulation. And it works because modern economies are fragile in ways most people don't understand until the dependency chain breaks. Brent crude moved the moment the strikes were confirmed. Futures contracts repriced. Shipping insurance premiums through the Strait of Hormuz climbed again. And every rerouted tanker, every delayed cargo, every risk premium added to a barrel of oil, that's a tax on the global economy that compounds daily. You think this is a Middle East problem? Check your gas prices next week. Check your grocery bill. This stopped being regional the moment energy infrastructure became a target category. Now let me tell you what happened diplomatically, because this is where the off-ramp died. The United States put a ceasefire proposal on the table. The exact terms haven't been disclosed fully, but the framework involved mutual de-escalation, some kind of operational freeze, a pathway to broader negotiations, standard crisis management playbook. And Iran rejected it outright. Not we need to discuss terms, not let's modify the framework. Rejected. And I need you to understand what that rejection means because there are three possible explanations, and the real answer is probably some combination of all three, but each one points in a very dark direction. First possibility, Iran believes they have momentum and sees no strategic benefit in stopping now. The strikes are working, Israeli defense capacity is degrading measurably, economic pressure is mounting, and a ceasefire would freeze the conflict at a moment that favors continuing. Second possibility, the terms were unacceptable. Maybe the framework demanded Iran halt operations without reciprocal guarantees about American or Israeli strikes. Maybe it didn't address the sanctions relief or security guarantees Tehran has been demanding for years. We don't know the full proposal, so we can't evaluate this with certainty, but unacceptable terms would explain a flat rejection. Third possibility, and this one keeps me up at night, Iran is in the middle of a leadership succession. Reports indicate they're selecting a new supreme leader right now, agreeing to a ceasefire during a transition, committing the next leader to terms negotiated by provisional authority. That might be politically impossible internally, regardless of what the terms actually say. Any of these explanations alone is concerning. All three operating simultaneously is a recipe for a conflict that nobody can stop, even if they wanted to. Here's the thing, nobody in Washington wants to say out loud. The United States has moved multiple carrier strike groups into the region, thousands of American personnel on those ships, plus the existing base infrastructure across the Gulf. The stated purpose is deterrence. Project enough force that Iran calculates the cost of escalation is too high and comes to the table. But deterrence only works if two conditions are met. First, the other side has to believe you'll actually use the force. Second, they have to believe the force will be effective. And Iran is testing both assumptions in real time. On the willingness side, Tehran appears to be betting that American domestic politics, economic pressures, and the institutional memory of Iraq and Afghanistan create hard limits on how far Washington will actually go. Whether that bet is correct, we don't know yet, but it's clearly the operating assumption driving Iranian strategy. On the capability side, and this is the technically interesting part, Iran has been demonstrating weapons that challenge American defensive architecture in ways we haven't seen operationally tested before. Hypersonic or near hypersonic technology, saturation tactics, multi-axis coordination, these aren't theoretical capabilities anymore. They're being used in combat conditions. Does that mean American forces are defenseless? Absolutely not. U.S. naval defense systems are among the most sophisticated on the planet. But are they being stressed in ways they weren't designed for? The evidence suggests yes. And then there's the gap between what the administration is saying publicly and what's actually happening on the ground. Public statements claim Iran is close to capitulating, that a deal is imminent, that pressure is working, but the observable evidence shows an adversary launching more strikes, hitting new target categories, rejecting ceasefire offers, and expanding operations. When the narrative says they're about to break and the reality shows them escalating, that gap becomes its own strategic problem. Because credibility matters, not just internationally, domestically. If the public is told the conflict is almost over while it's visibly expanding, that erodes the trust that future diplomatic claims depend on. And once you lose that trust, once the gap between official narrative and observable reality becomes too obvious to ignore, you've created a credibility crisis that limits your options in the next crisis. But here's the dimension almost nobody is analyzing, and I think it might be the most consequential long term. The Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, they host American military bases, they depend on American security guarantees, and they just watch strikes hit their territory. Emergency protocols activated in multiple capitals. And the fundamental question these governments are facing, the one no amount of diplomatic language can hide forever, is this. Does American military presence make us safer, or does it make us targets? That question has been theoretical for 40 years. It's operational now. If Gulf states start quietly signaling that American basing is a liability rather than an asset, the entire foundation of U.S. power projection in the Middle East begins to collapse. We're not there yet. But the trajectory is pointing in that direction. And the longer this runs without resolution, the faster that trajectory accelerates. So where does this leave us? The military situation is escalating faster than the diplomatic mechanisms designed to contain it. Ceasefire rejected, strikes continuing, naval forces converging, leadership transition in progress, energy markets destabilizing. There is no visible path to quick resolution from the outside. That doesn't mean back channels aren't active, they almost certainly are, but the public trajectory is escalation. The economic consequences are global now. Oil prices, shipping costs, insurance premiums, supply chain disruptions. These compound faster than most people expect because the global economy is a network of dependencies, and when you shake one node this violently, the vibrations travel everywhere. But there's another dimension to this that I need you to understand because it connects directly to why the 60-second warning time matters so much. Every interception Israel executes burns through a stockpile that takes years to replace. A single Iron Dome interceptor costs approximately $50,000 to $100,000 depending on variant. A David Sling interceptor runs $1 million or more. Arrow 3 for exoatmospheric intercept, we're talking several million per shot. Iran's ballistic missiles, depending on type, cost somewhere between $100,000 and $500,000 each. But here's the killer. Iran mixes them with drones that cost $20,000 to $35,000 to build. The defender can't tell which incoming signature is a $3 million warhead and which is a $30,000 drone until it's classified, and classification takes time that terminal phase defense doesn't have. So the standing order is engage everything. Every blip gets an interceptor. Iran essentially turned its drone fleet into a forced purchase order. Every mixed salvo is an invoice Israel has to pay, and the math runs in one direction. Production capacity for these interceptors is measured in dozens per month. Consumption during sustained operations is measured in dozens per day. That gap doesn't close through willpower. It closes through depletion. And when the magazine goes empty, the 60-second warning becomes irrelevant because there's nothing left to fire. And the human cost, civilians in Israel sheltering with 60-second warnings, civilians in Iran under constant strike threat, civilians across the Gulf watching their cities become potential target zones, none of this is abstract. These are real people deciding whether to sleep in beds or hallways tonight. I don't know how this ends. Anyone who tells you they do is lying or selling something. What I know is this. The next 72 hours are critical. The ceasefire rejection removed the most visible off-ramp. Iran's leadership transition will either create a negotiation window or close it permanently. The American force buildup will either deter escalation or become part of it. Those are the real questions. Not who's winning, not who's losing, but whether anyone still has the ability and the will to stop this before it becomes something nobody controls. And here's what absolutely nobody in Western media is discussing. China is watching every second of this. Beijing imports more oil through the Strait of Hormuz than any other nation on Earth. Every strike on Gulf energy infrastructure, every rerouted tanker, every insurance premium increase, that's a strategic lesson China is cataloging for future reference. If Iran can pressure the global economy by threatening a 21-mile waterway, what does that tell Beijing about Taiwan and the Strait of Malacca? The warning time is 60 seconds now. How much warning time does the world have before this goes somewhere none of us can come back from? That's the question keeping me awake. And it should keep you awake too.